to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello there and welcome. My name is Barry Schwenk. I'm a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host for Two Roads Crossing. Understanding the intersection of faith and vocation is a pretty tall order, but let's face it, if your life is anything like mine, it's more than just two roads crossing. It's like a multi-lane interstate that just gets jumbled up. And so how exactly do we manage intersections like that? How do we manage that place where our lives get really, really complex? Well, today I'm pleased to say that I am joined by Linnie Wright, and we're going to be discussing not just faith and veterinary medicine, but something that makes both of those even more complicated, which is marriage. So, Linnie, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm wonderful.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this, because you and your husband Joe just celebrated a huge milestone, didn't you?
Yes, our 50th anniversary.
50 years of being married, which congratulations. So when you hit that milestone, what do you do to celebrate 50 years?
Well, back in August, we went to the Holy Land, took a trip into Egypt,
wow.
Jordan, and Israel. So that's the way we kind of did the big celebration. And we had a lot of little things all along the way that we were doing. Like every time we got to eat, we were celebrating our 50th, So we have celebrated over and over and over.
I remember as a kid, I remember when my grandparents celebrated their 50th, and they set up a golden Christmas tree in their living room. And every time someone came over to visit them or to celebrate, they gave them one of the ornaments off of the tree. It was like a whole year's worth of celebrating. It's a wonderful. It needs to be celebrated. It's a good thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I was really excited to talk to you about this because, one of the issues that we face within our profession, obviously, centers around relationships, and to have that kind of longevity in a relationship. And you're not a veterinarian, right?
Right.
Okay.
I'm not a veterinarian.
This is like we're admitting.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not.
No. Suddenly your stock went way up, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty. So you actually, you have been married into this profession for 50 years, and that is a feat in and of itself. Congratulations for both you and Joe. Pray for me. I have a T-shirt that says the first 50 years are the hardest. So,
right.
So hopefully it's all smooth sailing from here. So, can you maybe give us a little bit of your story? How did you and Joe first meet?
Well, we both went to Wingate University now, but it was Wingate College, a 2-year school. We started there, and it was flu shot day. And so I went to the infirmary to get my flu shot. And the lady in front of me, they were using the pneumatic gun, and the lady in front of me hollered. So I turned around to leave. Well, Joe was working that day in the infirmary. And so he caught me and he says, "Oh, you can't leave. You have to get that flu shot." So I turned around and got my flu shot, but I took notice of him. And I found out who he was, and evidently he found out who I was.
Quite the impression. So he's been a pain in your arm ever since. Is that how?
Ever since, yes, yeah.
So then, how did you all make that connection? And so you're at the infirmary. He convinces you that you need to stay for it. And then what was that next step? How did he actually reach out to you?
Well, the next step was he sent word that he wanted to go out with me. And the girl who told me that said, "Joe Wright wants to go out with you. And if you don't go out with him, I want to." I said, "Oh no, I will. So anyway, I looked out my dorm room window and he was sitting over there on this wall across from my dorm. So I got all fixed up and walked out and walked past him to the rack and acted like I was looking for someone. And he came up and said, this is a really good line. He said, oh, there must be something better to do on a day like today than just hang around the wreck. And so he and I ended up sitting on that wall for a couple hours talking, and I think we fell in love that day. I mean, I really do. I was smitten. I was taken with him.
That's pretty.
But it
That's pretty
wasn't smooth sailing. I mean, I
Yeah.
had to conquer him.
Well, so what was that like? Because so now you all are both at this at a 2-year school.
Mhm.
What were those early days like? Was it uh, you said it was maybe you all fell in love from the very beginning, but how was that? How are those initial days of courtship?
Well, the initial days of courtship, it was a Baptist school, so I had to sign out. I had to sign out when he would ask me for a date, and we had to be in by 9 o'clock. And so anyway, that was a little restrictive, but we managed. And so anyway, we'd go out on dates and enjoy each other. And I kind of lost my train of thought there, Barry, for a minute.
Oh, you're
But
good.
but it was I know what I was going to say. It was a kind of place where hot pants and mini skirts were allowed, but we couldn't wear pants.
Okay.
So we had our go-go boots and our hot pants, and we were kind of like pseudo flower children.
This paints such a good picture for me.
And Joe, now when I first met him, he had lots of hair,
Of
and
course.
he had his sideburns that came out to about right here.
Joe.
And he was about 120 pounds, 6'5", but he was just the most handsome thing I'd ever laid my eyes on.
Oh, Joe.
And he drove a Mach 1 Mustang.
Oh, even better. Oh my goodness. So not only was it the pickup line, it was the car and the sideburns. That was the perfect trifecta. I don't know. I would have fallen in love with them. I don't know. I don't know how you could have avoided that. Yeah.
Perfect. He was just perfect.
So you're at a Baptist college now. Were you both believers at that time when you met, or what was your faith situation like?
Okay, we were both believers. We both had been saved. I grew up in Baptist church. He did too. So we were both saved. But I wouldn't say that we were really walking closely with the Lord. It looked like it, but it wasn't like a top priority for us. And it wasn't for quite a few years. So I'm ashamed to say it, but that's the way it was.
Yeah, well, that's the reality is,
Mhm.
when we talk about relationships, and especially as we're looking back at 50 years, the reality is never perfect, and that's part of, I think, the thing that needs to be discussed more often, because we think that because things aren't perfect, that we're somehow abnormal, that the fact that we have these ups and downs, the fact that our faith was not as strong, or that it waxes and wanes at different points in time. Did you find that your courtship, so was it smooth sailing that entire time? Was it smooth sailing that entire time? I mean, with the sideburns, it had to be, right?
I'm trying to think. When we left there, he went to NC State and I went to UNC Chapel Hill. And we were kind of had breakups, get back together, breakups, get back together. And I don't know what all that came from. I don't know. Thinking back, somebody told me one time, they said, and this is talking about marriage, the arguments you have that were such a big deal then, I can't even remember what they were.
Yep,
I remember
exactly.
having them, but I don't remember what the issues were.
Yep.
And so it wasn't very smooth sailing for us. No, definitely not.
And so
it was a rocky courtship.
Well,
until we got engaged. Sorry.
Well, so then how that happen? So you've got this rocky courtship, and so then you decide, hey, since it's rocky, let's get married. Is that what came next?
Well, here's the thing. We knew we loved each other. And then when he got in vet school, well, we got engaged in December, and he went to vet school that next fall.
Oh, wow.
So we were engaged a year
Okay.
And he was in vet school for half a semester before we got married the next December.
Oh, wait. So, okay, I'm just now registering this. So you all got engaged before vet school. So home. Okay. So that's a whole nother level of tension.
Yes,
And all that.
yes.
Because what were you studying, and what were your career aspirations at that time?
Okay, I was studying education
Okay.
because when I grew up, you could be one of three things. You
Mm,
could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, you could be a secretary. So
mm,
I chose teaching, but I did absolutely love the profession. I
mm,
loved the children. I loved everything about it.
mm.
And so that's what my mother was a teacher. A lot of our family, Joe's mother. So there was a lot of teachers in our family. So I just that was the profession I chose, and I loved it.
Yeah, it's a um it kind of gets well, just like I mean, we talk about veterinary medicine being a calling, and talk about
Right.
how we're gifted and suited
Yes.
for different
Yes.
vocations, and it's exactly the same thing, which is why I think even on this podcast we uh, of course, as a CVM podcast, we talk an awful lot about veterinary medicine, but the reality is most of the things that we talk about apply no matter what profession you're actually in,
Yes.
because you have to go
Yes.
through the rigors of training and being prepared, and entering into a profession and lasting in a profession. And so you're doing this. You're studying for getting your teaching degree. Joe decides, or Joe is working towards veterinary medicine. And where does that take him? Because at that time, did NC State have a vet school?
No,
No.
there were some slots in different states. And
Okay,
so he applied and he got in at Tuskegee in
gotcha.
Alabama. And so he went on there in August, and um he sold his Mach 1, and we bought a little 4-door Subaru with no air conditioning, and he headed to Tuskegee first. And so that was how that went. He went in the fall to
Hmm.
Tuskegee, and I finished up my student teaching.
And then you all were married then in December,
Yes,
which
his
meant
Christmas
that
break.
so over Christmas break during his first year of vet school, as you're just finishing up your student teaching, y'all
Yes.
decide the best thing to do is to get married. And
Yes.
how did that go? How did all those transitions go, and how did that first year of marriage go with all that? That's a lot of pressure to make all those. I mean, getting married is enough, but like
Right.
all those transitions at the same time. How was that first year of marriage then?
Um, let's see, how long is this video? Because
We can
that first year.
we can talk as
Well,
long as we
okay.
need.
Okay. Well, we did, like I say, got engaged a year early. Joe went to vet school. We got married. I graduated in December. We got married in December. We left for Alabama in December with that little brown Subaru loaded to the hilt. So we got down there. It was like a foreign land to me. I mean, I'd never lived outside of North Carolina. I didn't know where I was going. I did not care where I was going. I had Prince Charming, and I was going to follow him wherever he went. So anyway, as my grandmother says, we struck out, and we went to happily ever after down 85 toward Alabama. So when we got there, we realized that we were two different people trying to make all this work in this happily ever after thing. I had an idea, he had an idea. But anyway, we learned pretty soon that we had pretty serious conflicts, and some of them involved it, me throwing things like throwing pot. I never threw anything that would break. I only threw things, like pots or things like, I mean, I guess you could say we were both pretty immature. Had just turned 21, both of us. So anyway, we were down there in Alabama with nobody. We didn't know anybody. So we had, but here's the thing. There were times that were just absolutely wonderful. I mean, just absolutely wonderful. Then we'd have these disagreements, and it would just all go downhill, and it would last for several days, and we wouldn't speak, and all that mess. And then it would be like heaven on earth again. So it was kind of back and forth, and I don't know. I don't know if anybody else, I don't know how other couples do it, but I don't know. I don't really, looking back, I really don't know how we did it, because we did not seek the Lord during this time. We didn't pray about it. We didn't go to church. we just muddled through.
You were winging it. You were winging it.
And I
Well,
was teaching on campus. I was teaching
mm,
on campus there. So I had a job.
mm.
He got half tuition. So that was wonderful. And yeah, our
That's
rent
quite the
was
deal.
$50 a month. Our rent was $50 a month. And we lived in this old place that we swept out because they'd used it for a barn. And so but to me it was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, those are those foundational years, and you kind of muddle you kind of muddle through, because I think that we don't really do a great job um, of teaching how to communicate and how to get along and how to relate. And I'd like to say that we've gotten better at it, but to be honest, here we are 50 years later, and I don't think that we're any closer to being better at it. We seem to be not being able to get along with one another even more. And so the fact that that you can get through that time is, whether you're praying to God or not, it's by His grace that it happens.
Yes. Absolutely.
So you all were, so you're getting through vet school and taking those ups and downs, taking the lumps when you have them, but also you have those moments of clarity where things are really good. How is that transition then from that time from vet school out of vet school? Because then there's another big transition that happens. How did you all manage that one?
Well, Joe went to work with someone near Raleigh, so we moved down that way for a year and a half, and I taught school. But then he decided that, and I knew he'd always wanted this. He wanted to open his own practice. And when you get that in your system, you got to go with it. You got to do it. I mean, so that had always been his dream. And so we moved back close to his family, and we opened a practice from scratch in the middle of nowhere. And there were some difficult years there financially, and that was a biggie there. It was kind of a hard time.
Yeah.
It was physically stressful, and it was financially stressful.
And that adds to it. In marriage, there's some big linchpins that when those things are not present or they're struggling, that it just kind of accentuates everything else. How did you all manage to navigate through that challenge?
Well, looking back, Joe and I have both said that I was much more emotional about money situations than he was. I should have stepped back from that a little bit more and maybe let him handle. Men are just different with that. They just look at it differently. And I would have been better off if I hadn't had myself in it quite so much. And he has said that he should have taken more of a role in being in charge of all the, or more so with the finance things. But he was working so hard. I mean, he was working long hours, but we knew he'd have to do that, and we knew it'd be worth it in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting because even when we think about prior to going into marriage, we have this idea of what it's supposed to be like, what it's going to look like. You were driving off to your happily ever after in a Subaru of all but anyway, I'm not going to say anything about it. But
it was a little tiny Subaru, little family car.
Happily ever after in a Subaru. But even that, like learning to live as one. It's challenging because what that means, I think that as God kind of brings us together, we have to learn to acknowledge one another's strengths and also embrace our own weaknesses, because there are things that I know full well that my wife just can do better than I can, and I have to be able to submit to that so that our marriage is stronger. And there are places, I hate to admit it, like there are places where my wife is less emotional and I'm more emotional, so I have to let her in. But of course, she's a middle school teacher, so she has to, but it's just a gifting of part of who she is. And so whenever I get worked up over something, she's really good about helping me toe the line, and being able to give and take and receive that is really important. How at some point in time, as you're navigating through all of this, how did faith begin to become more of a priority in your marriage?
Well, here is the blessing in where we had been these few years that we had together. We both knew that the way we were living and what we were doing, the things we were associating with, we didn't belong there. Even though we were there, we knew we didn't belong there. And there was a blessing in that. We'd both been brought up in Christian homes, and we knew that the way we were living was not godly. I mean, it's not like we were doing anything bad.
Right.
We just weren't going to church, weren't, just associating with different kind of people. So when we decided that we would start a family, we were 27, and that's what really threw me for a loop, because we started going through infertility.
Oh, wow.
And that just took me to my knees, really, literally, literally. And that's when, and Joe too, but he didn't understand it. He didn't understand where I was coming from with that. And but it affected our marriage. Yeah. And so that's when I think we really came to like a crisis of faith, and we knew that something had to give here. Things weren't happily ever after, wasn't going right all of a sudden. So we needed something to help us through this. And of course, we turned to the Lord. I mean, that's all we could do. Right. And so that was when we were 27, and that really, really turned us around. But there were still some very difficult years in there.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. You come to this place, like you said, where your happily ever after doesn't look the way that you had envisioned, and your foundation is kind of shaken, and you have to ask a question. And so let me ask this. This is a really hard question, but how do you get to that place where your world does kind of turn upside down? How do you get past the place of just throwing up your hands and quitting then?
Well, I guess there again, I turned to the Lord, but there were some times when I think I just kind of did quit. I just did kind of give up and say, it's just not going to happen for me. It's just not going to be the life I envisioned. But I don't know, Barry, I guess Joe and I just, even with all our ups and downs, we really did love each other through all this. We really did. And he was trying to understand, and, it just, I really don't know how I got through it, because it was a really tough time. I mean, I did turn to the Lord. I did pray a lot, but I was depressed. I was ashamed. I was bitter. I was ashamed that I had such a deep desire to have a family. What was wrong with me? I thought, what is wrong with me? It's like I can't even function. And of course, I had a girlfriend who had a real close friend who had 4 children, and then she had her tubes tied and got pregnant for the 5th time, and then got pregnant before she could get to the hospital back to have something done the 6th time. So all those things, I was living with them, and I was absolutely miserable. I really was. But I hid that from everybody. I didn't want to share that with anybody, because at that time it was an embarrassment to me, and I thought something was wrong with me because I was feeling that way. I didn't know that it was a perfectly legitimate feeling, to have those feelings.
Right. And it's hard, because then you feel alone, not just alone in the world, but even alone in your marriage. And that can be overwhelming. And to be honest, there are a lot of people, probably listening to this, that have either been through or are going through similar circumstances where there are these ups and downs. And even in the midst of the ups and downs, you kind of have this picture of, I'm still where I'm supposed to be. And then just when you think you get your feet set, the rug gets pulled out from underneath you.
Right.
So how did you, when you say that you all started turning back to the Lord, what were the things that you started to do that in your mind, like what were the things in your mind that you were thinking, okay, I have to start making a change? Like what was that? What was that flip? What was that switch that got flipped? And then how receptive was Joe to all that too? Was that a mutual thing, or is that just you?
Yes, it was mutual. It was mutual. We first of all, we found a church. We found a really good Bible preaching church that we started going and learning and studying, and that just meant the world to us. It was wonderful. We just started doing basic things. We started having a quiet time. We started reading our Bible. We started associating with Christians. We started, we just started doing all the so-called right things, Christian things, and it works. If you just do them, and it works. So that was how we got. And then we started the adoption process, which was another long, drawn out process. After the infertility, then you got all the adoption process.
And here you are 50 years, right? 50 years. And that's the thing, I think, like I do want to talk to you more about some of the significance of some of those pitfalls that maybe you all had to navigate through, and even more specifically, some of the things that you've done to kind of navigate through that. But I think maybe as we wrap up today, I want to maybe encourage people listening, right? Because there's this place where we get to where it seems kind of hopeless, but if you just give it a little bit more time, right? If you just give it a little bit more time, things can turn around, but you've got to be committed to doing that. And I think listening to your story, hopefully as people kind of connect and identify with different portions of your story, they should also be reflecting, like, we're just sitting here talking after your 50th wedding anniversary. And so there may be some bumps and there may be some valleys, but with the right kind of attitude and the right kind of help, and the right kind of patience and a little bit of time, you can get through those things. And God is gracious enough to see us through. And if we learn how to allow God to speak into our circumstances and speak into our lives and speak into our relationships, doesn't matter what you do for a living, we begin to learn how to understand exactly what God desires for us and how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.